you always all on my back? Why you gotta do me like that? Why you gotta act like a bitch when I'm with you? Baby girl, because you treat me like shit. I pay for that grit bed, I never even slept in it. I pay for that crib and never stepped foot in. And now somebody else is eating all the pudding. Things change, now my dashboard wooden. All black Benz like a young Doc Gooden. Dark shades, cause I'm stone crazy. Go, we grown, stop playing on my phone, baby. All your childish tips to make me angry fall short, which only fuels the rage you have, because you have nothing. Understandable, I'm shining brilliant with 5 Brazilians. There were times I used to hide my feelings. Now I'm butt naked in the Lamborghini, and motherfuckers can't see me. Wait till this chick see me on TV. I made this shit look easy. Who would've thought I hit you right back? Why you always all on my back? Why you gotta do me like that? Why you gotta act like a bitch when I'm with you? Baby girl, I'm blue. So many women wanna call me baby, and you wonder why the fuck that I ain't call you lately. Some would say that I'm December for sex, and others would hate, but I don't give them no breath. Go on a date at the crib with the chef, and that's me. You could order whatever. The specialty is white snake and underwear sauce. You could probably catch me somewhere where the sun is next. And I understand it's only cause I'm popular. I'm getting topped off in the front row of the opera as Bocelli sings the Selly rings. I gotta go, you'll never know how good it feels to lay in bed with King. I'm not exactly flawless, but I'm gorgeous, just like a horse is. I know the thought of me succeeding makes a lot of people nauseous. Still I'm on the back of the boat, taking pictures with a swordfish. Why you always all on my back? Why you gotta do me like that? Why you gotta act like a bitch when I'm with you? Baby girl, I hope you get a paper cut on your tongue from a razor in a paper cup. I hope every soda you drink already shaken up. I hope your dreams, they're like raisins in the baking sun. I hope your titties all saggy in your early 20s. I hope there's always snow in your driveway. I hope you never get off on Fridays, and you work at a Fridays that's always busy on Fridays. I hope you win the lottery and lose your ticket. I hope it's been a Socrates put pull up in your kitchen. I hope the zipper on your jacket gets stuck, and your headphones short, and your charger won't work, and you spill shit on your shirt. I hope your tears don't hurt, and I can smile in your face. Cut my losses, how Delilah changed my locks to a fade. I hope you happy, I hope you happy. I hope you ruin that shit for a reason. I hope you happy. Why you always all on my back? Why you gotta do me like that? Why you gotta act like a bitch when I'm with you? Why you gotta act like a bitch, like pseudoscientist? Sometimes I feel the fear of uncertainty stinging clear. And I can't help but ask myself how much I let the fear take the wheel and steer. It's driven me before, and it seems to have a vague, haunting mass appeal. Lately I'm beginning to find that I should be the one behind the wheel. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there with open arms and open eyes, yeah. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there. I'll be there. So if I decide to waver my chance to be one of the high, will I choose water over wine and hold my own and dry? It's driven me before, and it seems to be the way that everyone else gets around. Lately I'm beginning to find that when I drive myself, my life is found. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there with open arms and open eyes, yeah. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there. I'll be there. Would you choose water over wine? Hold the wheel and drive. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there with open arms and open eyes, yeah. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there. I'll be there. Do 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 do. Oh no no no. Do 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 do. Bum 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 bum. Hello and welcome everybody to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. Sorry, let me fix my camera. It wouldn't be a Nerd Slayer podcast if we weren't doing something live. So hold up. Why is this thing? It does not want to move. There it goes. How's that? Is the shot okay? Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I know it's early, but we're kind of normally an early podcast, if I'm being honest. It's just that I got into the habit of kind of doing it later. No, you can stay if you want to troll. It's just that it doesn't seem like you actually have the stamina to do it. That's kind of my issue with most people who like quote unquote troll, is like they're not really just trolling. They're just saying a few things, and as soon as they get any sort of pushback, they're immediately like, oh my god, this person's hostile towards me. And I don't know, maybe my view of trolling has just changed a lot because of the internet's changing a lot. But one thing I want to talk about to start things off, we have a couple of things to talk about. Mostly kind of more like thinking topics today. You know, the kind where we're gonna do a little bit of designing in our heads, idea making and stuff like that. I wanted to do some stuff like that today, to have some fun. But I also wanted to talk about that I'm working on a video right now called is gatekeeping in MMOs or virtual worlds, parentheses like games, is it a good or a bad thing? And I won't spoil much of it, but I think it's pretty nuanced, and I actually think that gatekeeping not existing anymore is a large reason why the current virtual world industry is the way it is. Now, mind you, you can't always or ever really blame a fan base for not gatekeeping enough, because we don't actually have control over like a game's development as much as a developer does, or a corporation does, or a publisher, so on and so forth. But I still think, you know, I was there back then, and I remember there were a lot of instances where it was kind of like, we should probably gatekeep this concept or this idea. We should describe this as being like a virtual world concept or an MMO concept. And it's less about ideas, right? Like, if you guys don't know this already, you probably should, that pretty much every other industry in video gaming has stolen aspects from the virtual world industry. That sounds harsh, right? Stole. But art is basically just stealing and remaking. So it's not a bad thing, it's just that it's funny that many people used to always, and still to this day, often say like, nobody's gonna play an MMO, no one has time for stuff like that. And I'm gonna address that in a second. But part of that is always like, why are they taking all the progression systems and putting it in other games? Shooters, RPGs, fuck, racing games. I can go down the list, right? Now, here's the issue. Are MMOs learning a lot from other genres? Are virtual worlds doing that? Virtual worlds, yes. Massive multiplayer online games, probably not. And the reason being is that with just virtual worlds like, you know, Final Fantasy XIV or Monster Hunter Wilds, soon to come out, but you can include a world if you want. These games did look at gameplay in other genres and run towards them. Final Fantasy, the RPG market, and the Final Fantasy genre, it's basically a genre in itself, right? And then of course Monster Hunter had both Monster Hunter and Phantasy Star Online to draw on. The key thing, excuse me, in these games is that they ran towards like consoles and more modernized games. And this was actually a really good thing. It raised the level of the graphics, the story. Same thing with SWTOR. It raised a lot of bars. But here's the other problem. Whenever it comes time for a virtual world to have to run into the direction of a virtual world, do you see the problem? If you've lost your identity of whatever massive is and what constitutes massive, what direction are you running into, right? If you're running to the massive direction, you're running to a direction of yourself, right? I appreciate that, Mythos. As I often put on my stream title, people don't think I can be a very literal person at times, right? Maybe it's the autism. But like when I say that my voice is warming up on the beginning of my stream, that means I just woke up or I haven't even spoken yet. So my voice is literally waking up right now. But I appreciate it. Shout out to Mythos Shulk. Yeah, I'm not trying to big up the game right now, Yuji Moda. Yuji Moto is a good one. Or is it Yugi Moto? Yugi Moto. I think it's Yugi Moto, right? Yugi boy. Yugi boy. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? When it came time for virtual worlds to run into the direction of massive and world storytelling and roleplay, where do they run? I'll tell you where they run. They run to D&D, pen and paper. And we've seen that a little bit, right? But not a whole lot. And I think there's still a pretty big divide between those two audiences when there probably shouldn't be. But the reason there's a big divide is that I've talked about this many times, but when I was questioning a bunch of D&D players about this, their argument was that virtual worlds right now don't house the things that they want them to house. They don't have a focus on roleplay, and ultimately they can't build the kind of character they want to build. And the truth is I don't really have a counter for those things, even as a virtual world fanboy, right? I don't have a counter for those things. Character creators have kind of largely regressed and have taken away so much of your identity. Like, Galaxies is ancient, and it allowed you to create a character panel, guys. And then with socialization, that's been more of like a... What happened to the previous episode, December? It wasn't an episode. Are you guys on Discord? I can't tell sometimes how many of the people in the chat are on Discord, but it's because whenever I do my voiceovers, I use the same exact software. The problem is that the record and streaming buttons are right next to each other, so it's no more complicated than I was warming up with my voice right before I did my voiceover for X Defiant, which should be coming out, I think, in a couple of days. I know it's a quick turnaround, but we're trying to get to things quickly. And then also, that's nothing interesting. Virtual tabletops gave me so many... and that's the thing, is virtual tabletops kind of explore a bit of both of these concepts, right? A virtual world, essentially, right? And in many ways, tabletop. So I think that what we're going to start to see more of, and almost like a comeback, is as these virtual worlds start to come out, they're going to be offering a lot more activities besides just combat. And that's not just me trying to be Nostradamus and predict the future, but it's because they don't have a choice. If these games want to be competitive with other genres, you have to offer a little bit of each genre. And that's the benefit of an MMO or a massive genre. Does that make sense? Is you can house everything within yourself. Other games don't have that luxury, right? Like Final Fantasy will have like 3 different gameplay types within it, even their oldest games. Okay, maybe not the first 3, but you get what I'm saying. There's a lot of mini games in Final Fantasy. So for the players in Final Fantasy 14, if there was more mini games, I don't think they would be surprised by that. I mean, mind you, many of them aren't really Final Fantasy fans, but they're Final Fantasy 14 fans. But you get what I'm saying, like things like Golden Saucer exist anyway. Which kind of go along with what I'm saying. Which has existed in, I think, like 4 of the Final Fantasies. You're going to see more stuff like that. And that's because, remember, a virtual world can take stuff from the other genres too. The problem is that you can't take massiveness and sociality from other genres. Not really. I mean, does that make sense? And so you might be saying, so what is your point in all of this? It's because that's your genre. So virtual worlds lost what made them themselves, which is creating social situations. And why does that matter so much? Besides being human beings, besides all the studies that say that if you're not social, you'll literally die as a human being after a certain amount of time, and your health will literally deteriorate. Besides all of that stuff, right? Which when I talk about that stuff, it hurts people's feelings, but I'd recommend doing research into that because it shouldn't. The truth shouldn't really, like such an ingrained truth like that about human beings should not hurt people's feelings. But it kind of gave me this realization that in one of my videos that was pretty misunderstood, which I take a lot of fault for that, my soloable MMO video, which is actually talking about the concept of how a world is not built for a single person. And naturally, the thing that I told people that I wasn't saying is the thing that people latched onto and got butthurt by, because they didn't really bother watching the video. or they couldn't understand it, because these kinds of videos are complex. Editorials on virtual worlds, you can break them down, dumb them down as much as you can. Inherently, they're going to be complicated subjects. However, I want to do another video on that subject, and I thought of something recently when I was thinking the other night, that part of the problem is that people don't understand the difference between a world built for a solo player and a world that houses a solo player. I don't understand why there's a difference. I think it's because emotion has to be attached of people saying like, oh, I like to play by myself, so if somebody's like saying anything against that, that means they hate me. It could be something like that. I genuinely don't know, because it's become more of a problem now. Literally, science has proven this, that people are getting worse socially. We've lost a lot of our third places that we could congregate. And virtual worlds have largely served as a replacement for that for a long time. The problem is that many of them don't really house social environments. Now, I mentioned that there's two parts of being social that's very important for a virtual world. The second part, you guys might not necessarily think of it that much, but I can tell you behind closed doors with developers, it is probably the single most important thing in virtual worlds. That's called emergency. Emergent gameplay, right? Emergent gameplay is the concept of you and I walking out into the world right now, our world, and purchasing something from a vendor, right? Or meeting somebody else and having an interaction with them. That's a real life emergent gameplay. To create that in a video game is actually very difficult. It's what simulators and video game designers and developers and so on and so forth have been trying to construct for many, many, many years. Now, part of the problem there, and I'll jump into that in a second, is that the original games that housed concepts like this were made by turbo nerds. But here's a misconstruing of being a nerd that drives me crazy. I'm a nerd. And yet, because I do things in real life and I'm social, oftentimes people would strip that name away from me. That's where the Nerd Slayer name came from, NS. It's a bit of like a meme that a lot of things about me are memes, if I'm being honest, but that one's a big meme. Where it's like literally, think about it. Sorry, I have a lozenge in my mouth. They would try to divorce the nerd part from me. Right? Say like, oh, well, you're not really a nerd because you're social. And you're not really a nerd because you do sports or you're physically fit. And I would always be like, what does it have to do with me being a nerd? I play more games than you. I have less of a life than you. That was something I was very proud of at the time. And more. And I realize it's because people have a very particular view of what's a nerd. And I'm gonna shatter some perspectives here, but a nerd doesn't mean that you're not social. All humans are social. Maybe it means that you might be less social than some others, right? But nothing states in the fucking rule book of being a nerd that you can't be social, because humans are social. It presupposes that idea, right? The other thing is that most of my really close friends, if not all of them, are all nerds. And guess what? They're extremely social people. When I say extremely, I mean like if they're playing a game and they can't be social, they're already bored within like 2 minutes. Like I have friends like that. And I've largely become that way myself these days. Mind you, I'm playing Persona 4 Golden by myself because it's a solo game. Because I feel like there's a lot of, stuff to learn from the Persona series for virtual worlds as well. But you kind of see what I'm saying? Like, it's really hard to replace this concept of actually having sociality in a video game. And that's what makes survival games so special. It's what makes MMOs and virtual worlds and has made them so, successful for like 30, 40 years. Because they're a lot older than people think, especially now, because I'm old. But yeah, nerds are people too. Nerds are the prejudiced class. No, the point that I'm driving here is that I played Persona 4 Golden, to be clear, back on the Vita. I talked about that in my Vita video, but I played it more recently because I just felt like going back and playing it and then playing Persona 5. And then I wanted to do a video about it because I kind of feel like Persona 4 Golden's a better game, but I'm a little bit biased. So I wanted to kind of like do an analysis to see. And that's funny, like some analysis works that way, by the way, guys. Sometimes we have a thesis, and I'm like, I want this to be true, but I can't drive my conclusion to force that to be true, right? For example, just because I like particular series, when I cover them on my series, I try to be as impartial as possible. And when I say impartial, I mean, of course, I'm going to have a lot of bias and experience with those games. I mean impartial in terms of forming my actual criticism and market kind of analysis given that game. Now, to go back to emergent gameplay as a concept here, why is it so important? Because it's essentially gameplay that is never ending. It's gameplay that can create itself endlessly. That's what Landmark, EverQuest Landmark, was built on, this concept. It never came out, but it was built on this concept, right? Well, I guess Landmark technically came out. But EverQuest 3 didn't. Anyway, emergent gameplay is kind of like the Radiant AI on Elder Scrolls. It's this concept of quests coming out of nowhere, like players creating quests, even more dynamic than NPCs. A real living, breathing world with activities you need to do, people having different jobs and so on and so forth. But here's the problem. To create the mechanisms and systems for this is more complicating than it seems. Because it's not just taking the systems from real life and inserting them into a video game. That's called a simulation. Some games and so on and so forth have done that. Like even Altus Life, one of my most famous simulators I played, is like an Arma simulator, but it's a life simulator at the same time. So it's interesting. And there's many more games like that coming out lately. I was just watching a couple of trailers yesterday because I started editing again. So stay tuned for that, guys. There's going to be a lot of spicy editorials this month because I have a lot of thoughts. And I think that I need to get back to remembering that my most important role is as an educator. And while the Death of a Game series can educate, I think sometimes it doesn't always do that, because sometimes it's more about telling a story. Sometimes it's more about being sad or talking about people's feelings. So I think it can actually be a mixture of a lot of things while also being educational. While the editorials that I make, while they've historically never been as popular as you can imagine, they're basically my ability as like an academic or an intellectual to kind of just like nerd out. Fortnite? Are you a Fortnite fan? Sometimes I go back to Dot Hack series because of that. Oh, the Dot, my bad. I made you sound like a truck. I gave P4 Golden a shot when I got a Vita and needed games for it. Glad I did. It was one of those games that stuck with me. Nice. Yeah, and so that's the thing, Mythos. It's actually hard to explain emergent gameplay as a concept. Because if I explain it as role-playing to players, they'll be like, that sounds gay. Or they'll be like, that sounds like being friendly. And it's like, it's hard to make people understand that roleplay is also... Yeah, Coraline, big brain. That's nice detectiving there. You picked up on what I was kind of subliminaling. Good, Polly, I'm glad. But yeah, so going back to like emerging gameplay. So what makes it so illustrious and also so feared as a concept that games have folded over trying to accomplish it, and some have never even launched? It's because basically it requires an understanding of how to build a proper world, right? Worlds need mechanisms. I'm gonna blow your minds, but many of you have been paying attention, so you already know this, especially the detectives in chat, is that survival games already figured this out. Survival games figured out if you add permanence and actual like destruction to a world, you suddenly change the paradigm of how that world is played, right? Suddenly now people care a lot more about defending things and holding on to things and creating crazy amount of emerging gameplay. Survival games, that's what they're about, guys. Without sounding arrogant, they're kind of like doing the least amount with the most amount of tools allowing you as the player to kind of create the most amount of fun, right? Now, some of these games do a really poor job of even that, and I'm not trying to make excuses for them for getting away with a design like that, but I'm saying, largely speaking, that's kind of like the niche that survival games kind of serviced. They realized that, I love these, by the way. Good question, computer internet. You're perceptive, but I love these headphones. Honestly, this is my second pair because my other one, I had them for such a long time and they broke, but I got another pair. I just like Sennheiser a lot, and I also like Sennheiser a lot. And the ones that I had before these, well, two series before these, because I broke the previous ones on accident. As you can see, there's a little bit of wear and tear on this one too. Now I could fix this, but here's the thing about me with kind of technology. What I do with my second headset after I buy a new one, like what I would do with this one, is I would either tape it and then use it as like a mobile headset, or I would just give it to one of my friends. I have a lot of friends here that, you know, could use some technology, could use something like studio headphones to either help them make music or just, you know, be chill as fuck. So I usually give my old tech to my friends, or my family. Get an R36 and convert Vagrant Story to PvP. Should I play Vagrant Story? I've seen that a lot, by the way. And when you say an R36, you mean the newer version of the Vita? Is that what you're referencing? Shout out to my Vita lovers in chat. What's up, Rintastic? It's good. I actually started earlier today. As you can tell, my hair is like still drying. But yeah, so something else I kind of wanted to get into about this whole topic of emergent gameplay is because I kind of was talking about this in my Discord. I think something that often surprises people about the old age developers, the ones who created the games back then that everyone knows and, you know, assigns all these emerging gameplays and experiences to, Asheron's Call, EverQuest, the first WoW, well, you know what I mean, like the early WoW, Final Fantasy 11, UO, couple more examples, I'm sure. And the reason being is that those nerds weren't just nerds, they were social nerds. So they also understood things like social concepts, right? If you read a lot of or listen to Brad's interviews, Brad McQuaid, the rest in peace, the creator behind EverQuest, that went on to help, you know, indirectly basically create WoW. Brad basically was a big believer in creating downtime on purpose to create space for people to be social. And he talks about it in his videos that he kind of overdid it. But I think that it's so important to look at that and realize that, like, that's what they were thinking about back then. In the 90s, in the early 2000s. These are like early age nerds already having very well developed concepts of how to create social environments. How, right? It almost seems like it's impossible. Well, I'll tell you how. There's two things. They had the benefit of D&D, right? All the Turbo Nerds, original devs, you can look, WoW's original devs, Rob Pardo, what's his name? God dang. I always forget his damn name for some. Jeff Kaplan, more. These guys were Turbo Nerds, but also D&D players. And I think you look at their like records and track records, and you can kind of see that passion come through. That they have a pretty good understanding of systems, but they're also fairly social. And that gives them the ability to kind of work in a way that connects the worlds that maybe other developers or people aren't necessarily doing. Now, the problem is, over time, many people, such as myself included, figured that time's linear, and so things are always going to improve. The problem is that things didn't really improve. And what I mean is, like, yes, games have gotten better in a lot of ways. That can't be denied, especially in the virtual world industry. The problem is that things like the character creators aren't necessarily better or more detailed. And that might seem like kind of like a small issue, but when it's continuously happening on new games, right? Then it's kind of like, When did they get this idea that we don't care about character creators? I don't get it. And you realize it's because the game's being made by people that either A, weren't originally in the industry, or don't necessarily have an understanding of what makes it what it is, right? And I think that another part of this problem, and I was talking about this on Discord, that people kind of really underestimate, and I'm going to make a video about this, is that part of it is based on recruiting. It's recruiting for projects, right? Whenever it comes time to make the team for New World, Amazon had X amount of money, a lot of money, by the way. Most of it they spent on their engine, and most of their time they spent on the engine. I think like 3 years to be exact is what I was told by a developer. And somebody very much connected to Amazon, who now doesn't even work on the project. What a surprise. They work back at Amazon proper. But anyway, what I noticed with that project is that the most important thing starts from the top, right? And I'm not just talking about leadership. I'm talking about the hiring process. People are hiring people for MMO and virtual world projects that have no experience. Now you might be saying, yeah, but like technically, for example, you haven't developed professionally on an MMO, so you wouldn't get hired. That's true. Now here's my counter. The way that we've historically always combated this in the virtual world industry, partly because I don't think there's really any other alternative, while some think it's about exploiting a workforce, sometimes it is, right? You hire somebody from the game, you pay them less. But in virtual worlds, this is actually how our best developers got their starts. I'm going back to Kaplan, actually. Kaplan was an EverQuest like turbo nerd, right? That they were basically like, hey, let's put this guy on WoW. And it worked, right? Brad McQuaid, turbo nerd and Deku Mud. Hey, let's give this guy some money, right? Like many of the early MMO stories are like that. It's turbo nerds being given opportunities and money because they were super turbo nerds, not just nerdy, had design, developers. No game industry existed. So how are they picking people, guys? They were picking them based on passion, based on how many hours they were playing. Jeff Kaplan was a top raider. he was in like a top 10% clan. Brad McQuaid was like, I think one of the most played players on Deku Mud. Like the Gower brothers behind RuneScape, same thing. Deku Mud grinders. Do you kind of see the point that I'm making? And I know you guys are gonna like yell at me for a second because I'm gonna make a rap comparison, but bear with me, okay? I've been watching a lot of like old rap interviews and new rap interviews about old rappers. And I love to listen to producers talk about why they did something or what made something special to them. And recently I watched an interview, very recent interview, because they're putting out a new album, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. And this interview, Dr. Dre talks about how he believes to be an expert in your field, especially in an artistic field, you have to constantly be loving it and be getting involved in it. Meaning that when they were telling him, oh, you know X and X song from X and X album, he was glowing about it. He was like, I love, like, boom, boom. And like, he was like even mouthing the sounds to it. They were like, how do you like, and he was like, you have to do that. I have to love this shit. DJ Quick, another famous behind a lot of big hits for Tupac, said the same thing. And it kind of dawned on me. I'm like, then why is the video game industry different? Especially the virtual world gaming industry, where people wonder why Todd Howard, who came out with Shadowbane originally, which people thought it was revolutionary and just needed more money, had Crowfall, and Crowfall was this massive dud. How does that happen? It's because Todd was not applying himself, like Dr. Dre was talking about, like DJ Quick was talking about. They're not turbo nerds anymore. They've lost that part of themselves. Maybe in other games, other fashions, but that never came through in their games, right? And you should be able to see and feel that passion coming through in their games. Now, I'm going to Uno reverse card everybody in chat with a really good example that we used in chat already, which is, guess who fulfills this to a perfect T? Yuji Naka, the creator of Phantasy Star Online. Guess who's going to be second on my list if I'm mentioning Japanese developers? Yoshi P also applies to that. These are two developers who loved Western games. Particularly in Yuji Naka's case, Diablo. He was obsessed with Diablo. Obviously, Phantasy Star feels like Diablo. Anyone who doesn't see that is, you're crazy. He's even admitted it multiple times on record. And Yoshi P, what were Yoshi P's favorite games? EVE Online, Ultima Online. But what did he model his new game after? WoW, right? But with still that knowledge of Ultima Online and EVE Online. These are very complex sandbox games. He says it's literally his favorite game. I think he said UO was his favorite game. But that could be a bit of nostalgia, right? Because for many of us sandbox gamers, UO or our first sandbox is our favorite. But anyway, this is maybe not very well known, or it should be. But yeah, Yoshi P is a proper MMO virtual world fan and stan. He knows the games, he knows the systems, he knows how they're different than Japanese ones and how they're different than his game. He's all in, and that's what makes it always annoying to talk about this kind of stuff with like diehard fans. Is I'm like, guys, your Lord and Savior is aware of all of this. The dude's a genius, bro. You got to give him his due diligence. He knows what he's doing, and it came from being a turbo nerd, right? Yes, Ashes of Creation developers, bunch of Arcade fans. I mean, there's something there. I'll give them there. I'll give them that. There's something there. Even I think the CEO is also a pretty big fan. That counts for something, right? Garage nerds' dreams become money printers for greedy companies. Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's what also turns out a lot of creatives from the industry. I talked about that with one of my other friends too, is that creatives are sensitive, and not just sensitive, they don't like to play by the rules, typically. And if they play by the rules, they like to play by their own rules, like me. As much as it apparently annoys and angers people that I have rules for my community. But you see what I'm saying? So Reb Ford being the new head of Warframe also has completely changed it because she played the game so much as a community manager. Yeah, so I was actually, it's funny you mentioned community managers. Something that shocks people is, I've mentioned this multiple times and I'll go on record and debate this to the end of time. I've walked into 3 or 4 different studios, and guess who's always the most knowledgeable person about the industry? The community manager. Now, many of you might argue, well, that makes sense because they need to be in the community. Okay, fair. That's a good point. Even though I made the mocking voice for it. I have a tendency to do that. Even for my own points. But anyway, I still think that a turbo nerd guiding your audience and being the one to lead things is the most important thing. But should the community manager be your leading turbo nerd? No, I think they should be one of. I think your leader of the fucking game and company and vision should be another one, right? This should be another turbo nerd. Now, I've been beating up on New World for a while, and I'm gonna do it again. Because I know a lot of the developers who worked on the project, including the ex-community manager. The community manager on New World knew more than 99% of the developers. They literally not only were an MMO grinder, they even did journalism on MMOs and virtual worlds. I remember like looking at them and being like, I'm not trying to be a dick in my head, but I was like, why are you a community manager? Like, you should have some direct influence on this project. Because, like, you know what the fuck you're talking about. But it doesn't always work that way. And when I got into those, you know, secret rooms at New World, as I've talked about many times, I was like, these are the leaders? These guys don't even know what they're talking about in this industry. And that's because they're hiring in these fields in video gaming for virtual worlds. They're hiring all kinds of developers. Oh, you worked on Ratchet and Clank? Fuck yeah, design my world. What the fuck? Is he like a D&D stan or some shit? Did he put 2,000 hours in fucking WoW or Final Fantasy 14? No? Then why the fuck is this guy leading the company? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Literally, you do not know what you're talking about. I'm talking to you, Scott. You shouldn't have taken that job, bro. But since people are gonna take jobs like that, regardless, because they want to make a living and they want to make a lot of money, especially good opportunities, it's on the recruiter. It's on the company. You have to blame Amazon. they put people in positions of power who had no fucking clue what MMOs were, who thought survival games from 2012 were still cool, and many more things like this. And it comes from the top. It comes from leadership. It comes from the hiring process, right? If you're hiring for a virtual world, in my honest opinion, you should play these games. Why is that controversial? Imagine hiring like an engineer or producer for a fucking music genre who doesn't listen to music, or even the genre that they're fucking producing in. It just, I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. And we've let developers get away with this shit. And I remember people always making logic for developers. Oh, it's because developing an MMO is so difficult. Yes, that's why they need to play the game, so they understand how their developing is making an impact. How else can you know this? And I've gotten pushback before. Oh, you're expecting people to play video games as a job? Yes, that's what a developer should be doing. That's what Riot Games does, and other developers. I think it should be more commonplace as a developer. You're getting paid to play games and develop them. How do you get ideas if you're not playing your game? Like, Riot's coming up with shit because they're playing their games. Like, don't you guys feel that when you play a Riot game? You know the developers are playing those fucking games, right? It feels like it. But if you ask me, new gamers just want to get in and start playing, not fiddle 2 hours in the character creator like turbo nerds. But that's what presets are for, and presets have existed for a long time. I think even like Final Fantasy XI had presets. Like old ass games have had presets, where it's like you can just press these presets and even press saved ones and even load templates if you want, especially with modern technology. But the problem is that like by using the logic like that, Rentastic, you're allowing developers to make worse games. And this is a problem I have with a lot of players of the industry, is that we don't realize how much our own dialogue and belief systems hurt the genre. And again, to clarify, I'm not blaming us for why the genre is the way it is, or for certain things lacking. What I'm saying is that, I'll give you a good example, okay? Let's talk about Guild Wars 1, and Guild Wars 2, and maybe even Guild Wars 3. When you look at Guild Wars 1 and you look at Guild Wars 2, for some people, like diehard fans, they don't seem connected at all. The gameplay is like intrinsically different. However, as someone who played both, like way too much, almost like in total, both of them probably like half 10,000 hours, somewhere around there, like a little under that. But I understand it. It's because Guild Wars 2 is a response to Guild Wars 1. Does that make sense? It's because the biggest complaints about Guild Wars 1 were the combat, were the engine, were the gameplay, was not feeling connected to your character, was no action. All of those things were fixed in Guild Wars 2. Now, what was the problem? The problem is they ran so much into that direction, they neglected their tab target audience, and thus their big brain audience. And mind you, a lot of those players, you know, like me, still kept playing Guild Wars 2 because I still had the reflexes as a FPS gamer growing up playing Halo 2 and BXRing everybody. I still had the reflexes to play Guild Wars 2. Many of my friends did not, and they instantly quit the game. And at first I kind of, you know, was arrogant. What, you guys suck. You know, why'd you quit? Because I was young and I wasn't thinking about this kind of stuff. And now, especially now, I think back and I'm like, Guild Wars 2 kind of fumbled a little bit of that bag, right? They lost a bit of their core audience. Now, why is this relevant? Why am I mentioning this? That's because with Guild Wars 3, they have the chance to actually bring some of that back. but it's going to be one of the most interesting projects we might ever see, ever. And the reason I'm saying that is not just because I'm a Guild Wars fanboy. Well established, I know. I had a fucking Hall of Monuments. It's because ANET has been reactionary in a good way and has reacted to things. Yeah, M-Call, that's exactly what I'm talking about, bro. Great point. Galaxies was the same way, by the way. So many of my friends would be like, you can't jump in this game? Like, what the fuck? I'm out of this shit. And I'm like, I mean, what am I gonna say? Like, Guild Wars 1 was the same way, and so many of my friends quit it for that reason too. But anyway, what's my point about Guild Wars 3? Guild Wars 3 has to run into both directions. That's the key, guys. If Guild Wars 3 is Guild Wars 2, it's not gonna work in the same way. It's gonna have the same kind of niche audiences and players. And yes, they can lean more into making things more educational and make it a hardcore sort of game. I'm cool with that. But do I think that that's gonna service everyone? And maybe necessarily as much as they're supposed to service with NCSoft still, you know, they've acquired them like 20 years ago. Probably not, right? Guild Wars 3 is gonna have to be big. And big in a certain kind of way. And I think that if they can run back into Guild Wars 1 as a direction, right? And make it a bit more like Tap Target, more identity, more about having support DPS and supports in general. And just like being more aware of that sort of stuff, you'll have a game that's going to be even more revolutionary than the first two were. Why would they remove jump? What the fuck? And to be clear, Guild Wars 1 already had the concept of maps. They just weren't fully open yet because the technology didn't allow for that. And if you just take a little bit of time to examine the industry, this was actually par for the course. Phantasy Star didn't allow for that either. And Guild Wars 1 was largely copying off of Phantasy Star. On top of that, when Phantasy Star 2 came out, guess what the first innovation was? Bigger hub zones, open world zones. And that's because it's just a natural progression. Even for a MMORPG, a less massive virtual world is a natural progression towards having at least some sort of like open zone. Even if it's just 10 players, I think, isn't PSO like 20 or something like that? Or 12? I can't remember, but it's not that much. Yeah, I think that's how most people treat SPVP, a Mythos Shulk. And something worse than that, I don't blame them. Because the problem that Zero sends Pinball, if he's in chat, we've talked about this ad nauseum, is that Guild Wars 1's plot, and Mr. Mirror can back me up on this, was all about teaching you how to get prepared for the game. Guild Wars 2, I don't know what they were thinking, maybe because they just went really heavy with the open world questing, public questing that they got from Warhammer. But they went really into this like, it's more about you and you're the power fantasy guy, which is cool. And I think people liked that. The problem is it did fuck all to actually prepare you for the game. And another big part of that problem, and I've fucking cried about this endlessly because it drives me mad that ANET did this to themselves, but ANET actually already had a solution to this problem. Interspersed throughout its leveling process were dungeons. Dungeons still exist, but then what's the difference? What am I talking about? Pre-launch and just at like post-launch dungeons were very difficult. You can look up multiple reviews right now, including on MMORPG.com, one that even had experience, where these, I wasn't one of the ones invited to that particular test. I was invited to different testing. They invited the like journalists to separate testing than the one that I was invited to. The reason why I'm complaining about that is that I would have either taught these journalists how to play it or made fun of them for doing the slop that they did, which is they basically were playing the dungeons in Guild Wars 2 and getting shit on. And in their reviews, they're just like, oh my God, it's so hard. Like, this shit's not fair. It's like, okay, first off, you guys didn't even level your characters. You were given characters, and then you're thrown into dungeons where all of you are obviously dog shit. We can watch you play, and to be fair, most people suck at Guild Wars 2. It's a hard game, but they're even worse than everyone in chat right now. They were really bad at the game. And trust me, I was watching them play. Not in game me myself, but I was watching them stream or do their little reviews. And they were getting shit on by the low-level dungeons. This is a true story. The journalists, the media critics that everyone always put on a pedestal back then, and lately has been losing that pedestal. They were getting shit on in low-level dungeons. So why did this matter? They complained endlessly about it. It's too hard. Nobody's gonna like it. Some were even making proclamations like that. So what did ANET do? They knee-jerk reaction said, fuck, if the journalists are gonna suck, everyone's gonna suck. Which was not true, but they literally just dumbed the fucking dungeons down so much that now nobody even thinks about the dungeons in Guild Wars 2. The dungeons don't prepare you for anything. They're way too easy. And they weren't. They actually were difficult, right? And that's the problem is that when you lose difficulty progressively, people think it's about rushing you to the end. No, it's not. It's about preparing you to get to that journey at the end. Because guess what? If that dungeon was enough to ruin your journey, you wouldn't make it. Anybody in Guild Wars 2 right now, if somebody can't beat a dungeon, are they gonna beat a strike mission? Are they gonna beat a freaking raid? Hell no. That's not me being elitist. Talk to the Guild Wars fans in chat. Talk to my Guild Wars fans in my Discord, /Nerdslayer. They will tell, you're getting smacked up hard. You ain't doing a raid in Pug. You ain't pugging a raid unless you're really good or have top gear, right? This game is difficult, and there's a beauty to that. The problem is that the dungeon's not going to get you prepared. And I've talked about this with Final Fantasy XIV's approach. The problem with Final Fantasy XIV's approach to difficulty and why the Japanese clear percentages are so much higher, it's not just cultural. I hate when people say it's just cultural. It's not just cultural. That helps. The other reason is because the concept of banging your head on a difficulty meter until you can smash through the threshold to get to the next one is actually not a very typical way to increase your ability to get better at a game. It's one of the hardest ways to do it. Does that make sense? Because you're getting basically the kids version of the game up until that point, and then suddenly you're thrust into Elden Ring. It's like, what the fuck? Meanwhile, the other people that play Elden Ring have been playing Elden Ring the entire time. The people that play Dark Souls have been playing it the whole time. Shit, I'll even throw in games like Majora's Mask. That game was really fucking hard. You know how many people complained about how hard that game was? I did. I was a kid playing it. I had the gold version of it. Shout out to my Uncle Nick. And yeah, a lot of Japanese games historically have been hard. That's kind of what makes them unique and what makes them what they are. Well, then why is Final Fantasy XIV different? Because they took a Western approach. There's difficulty levels. I don't like the difficulty levels. They don't actually prepare you to get better at the game. Because the majority of players don't play the next tiers. And stats have always backed that up, even in WoW. Yes, over time, people are getting better, and they're playing higher end content. But not that much. Such small percentages of it. So you might be saying, well, then why are Japanese players doing it? Because I think culturally, they're okay with that concept of being dog shit until they're good. I don't think a lot of Western players are okay with that. And I think that that's totally fine with not being okay with that. Because guess what? It doesn't really match what an MMO is about. An MMO is about progressively kind of being shit, getting good, being shit, getting good, being shit, getting good, being shit, getting good, and then being powerful as fuck, and then having in-game content that's like gonna smack you around. The problem in a lot of like leveling experiences, including Final Fantasy XIV, is that it's so easy. You're just doing this the whole time. You're stat lining, or not stat lining. Where's my doctor friends? You're redlining. You're just hitting the same like you know what I'm saying? Like whatever the analogy is. I butchered that one. And yeah, and I'll give credence to the whole cultural thing about Japan. Of course, they don't have very many virtual worlds, so they're gonna latch onto whatever ones they do have, and whatever ones they do have are typically pretty difficult. Even like Monster Hunter. Flatlining? Yeah, there you go. Redlining is like or whatever, like the bad version. I mean flatline like that's the problem is you're flatlined through ARR, even Heavensward, I'd argue. And I know I'm gonna get hate for that, but I've been getting hate from Final Fantasy 14 fans from the beginning. So what else is new? But it's like you're like this, and then suddenly it's like, okay, guys, you want to do like Savage content? It's like, no, I don't. And again, people for a long time would say, "What? Who cares? If people are okay with this, then what does it matter?" Here's the problem: anytime Yoshi P tries to introduce difficult content, guess what happens? Everybody complains. He took so much of that complaint that there's a recent article in a topic about this where Yoshi P literally came out and said, like, I made the game too easy. Which I literally have been saying for like fucking ages. So to hear him say that, I'm not gonna lie, was very much like, yes. Am I that surprised? No, because he's a very sharp guy and he's very honest. But just like, it meant so much to me because like that's my issue with Final Fantasy 14 in so many ways. It doesn't mimic itself after being a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy games are hard. Final Fantasy 14 is not that hard for the vast majority of the game. And I don't think that that's actually a good thing. And it doesn't match up with Final Fantasy as a series. And Yoshi P's point was basically like, when I try to introduce difficult things, people are always saying it's too difficult, right? And to the point to where they took like the difficult classes, like the one I was playing at the time, the monk, and they made them easier. And when I found out about that, I was like, it wasn't even hard to play in the first place. This is what happens when you don't gatekeep. The game gets made for an audience that doesn't even play the vast majority of the games in the genre and would never, regardless of it being Final Fantasy or not. Because they're playing this game because it's essentially a game with training wheels, which is the genius in many ways of the game. But what happens after that reaches its endpoint? After the Final Fantasy 14 fans get used to that and they become better gamers. They want better content. You think it was L up into late SB? People tell me that because SB started introducing the more like Guild Wars 2 style zones. So, I mean, I can't say anything about that. I never got to SB. Sorry. I need to. I still plan on it. Yeah, and Mr. Mirror, to back up on Guild Wars 1 for a second, Guild Wars 1 didn't have that. In-game content was not that much more difficult. I know people are going to push back on that a little bit, but I'm just going to say with all my hours and years playing, I personally don't think that was the case. I think most of us were already pretty, like, ready for it. Well, that's the thing, Mr. Mirror, is that I really hope that ANET has learned their lesson with the third game. Because, like, for the longest time, including from the fan base, the number one thing I would always hear as like a response would be like, oh, well, it's what made the game unique and it worked for the game. So, like, you're just a hater. Guys, if the Holy Trinity system didn't work out, or not having it worked out well for Guild Wars 2, how come in all the in-game content, even when I was playing SPVP professionally, we almost all came up with our own versions of the same exact mechanics, concepts, and support classes that already existed? Because we proved that their system doesn't work. Taking a fighting game approach to MMOs, with all those abilities and all those classes and like interactions, it just doesn't work. Maybe in a different way, BDO style, Black Desert Online, but not with Guild Wars. Guild Wars is more about using connections and combinations and boons and conditions, combos, you name it, right? And I think that
the idea of like streamlining everyone into this like esport version of that, where everyone can heal and so on and so forth, it seems like it's actually a smart thing to do, but in reality it's not. And that's because your healing will never be as good as an actual support player's, which puts all the pressure on you to be the healer. The other thing is that they came up with other healing specs anyway because so much healing is needed in the game. The other thing is that power is so powerful in the game, no pun intended. By them removing a lot of support DPS functionality of the first game, they shifted the game so far into the power-centric realm, especially because of the speed of the game, that's the other problem with Guild Wars. It's just it's too fast. So I'm really, really, really interested to see if ANET learns from their mistakes. They seemingly always have, and they're a bit reactionary. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I could see them actually having a benefit from that in this case, because if they're reacting to 1 and 2 and the criticisms of both, they might make the perfect Guild Wars game. And I'm not trying to hype shit up. I'm just being dead at, like, you see what I'm saying? Because the first game is a response to WoW. It even had 2 or 3 of the original developers. The second game is a response to Guild Wars 1. If the third game is truly a response to the first 2 games, we might have the best MMORPG. We might have the best Guild Wars game, and finally have a Guild Wars game that can actually permeate to the masses, you know? Yeah, well, so that's when I talk about the difficulty in Guild Wars 1, I'm always talking about from the very beginning. Not to be a turbo nerd for a second, but when people have ever like approached that game or games like that with the "it's solved now, so what do you mean?" Like I literally don't understand their brains. Because of course it's solved now. The game's been out for fucking 20 years. Yeah, we figured it out a long time ago. It's a pretty like static game. It doesn't change. So difficulty, when people talk about like me, like OGs talk about Guild Wars 1 difficulty, they're never talking about the current difficulty, because the game is not just solved now, you can beat it by yourself. So it's changed like completely. But one common misconception about Guild Wars 1 and old school MMOs in general is people think that, oh, well, the internet wasn't as prevalent, so then therefore people didn't solve this stuff. Guys, when you played Hall of Heroes, you were required to fucking use a build that was team build required. Rank like 4 or higher. Meaning that at the higher ends in Guild Wars 1, it was always elitist as fuck with builds. Anyone in chat right now knows exactly what I'm talking about. You can see the palpability on my face, because the elitism would kill me. I hate playing fucking common ass builds. I'm just not that kind of guy. I like to change things around. But dude, they would literally, boom, put it in chat, boom, click it, boom, load, there's your build. Oh, you're not, hey, spam your build. You put your build in chat. It wouldn't be the right build. You're like trying to like, you know, like pull the wool over their eyes and shit. And they'd be like, bro, that's not the build on the team. Okay, my bad, bro. That was in like 2006. So the Build Wars stuff has always been what Guild Wars has been about. And most MMOs have always had very turbo nerd guide type centric mentality surrounding them. I think where the misconception comes from, as a guide maker myself, that's kind of how I got popular in Guild Wars 2, ironically. The common misconception is that people think that, oh, because now guide makers are more prevalent and YouTube videos are more prevalent and streams are more prevalent, games are figured out. It's not true. Here's the thing. What all that does is create a meta mentality. And I can prove this, and I've proved it many, many times before. That if I load up Guild Wars 2 right now, all I have to do is just read what the meta is, and I'll shit on the majority of the players on the ladder. Because the truth is that in a game as complex as Guild Wars 1 or 2, if you're just going to play the meta against players like me, who have a lot of experience, we're going to exploit every inch of that. Because we know how to exploit that, right? This is called counter metaing, right? Because meta is not just stagnant and, oh my god, these are always the best. PvP has never worked that way. And people have always had this weird delusional reality of like tier list in PvP. And you can kind of have them, but not really. Because you have to ask, what's the arena? Is this world versus world? Is this SPVP? Is this 2 versus 2? Right? All of that matters. But if you're playing Guild Wars, you're playing a team game. And if you're playing Guild Wars 1 or 2, you're playing a game that must be played in synchronicity with your teammates, right? Because that's how the game and the combat works. You can't skip that process. Now, why is Guild Wars 2 more exploitable for me than Guild Wars 1? Because reflexes matter way more in Guild Wars 2. So if I boot up Guild Wars 2 right now, I can time people's fear, or rather I can use my fear as a necro to time people's heals to where they will miss their heal. And since they don't have a heal anymore, and there's really no support in the game, they're dead. That's how fast you die in high-level Guild Wars 2 PvP. When players know how to time your abilities and counter them, you're dead like that. Seconds. I don't know a game that's faster, MMO or MMORPG wise, literally, than Guild Wars 2. Which is crazy to say. Like Darkfall might be faster, but Darkfall is described as Quake the MMO. So you know what I'm saying? Like, whatever they do with Guild Wars 3, please, ANET, here's the camera. Don't make it Quake again. Don't make it fucking fighting game like reflexes again. And I enjoyed that, and I reaped the benefits of that. But I'm telling you, as somebody who did, if you're gonna do that, add plenty of other specs that are easier to play, or other classes that don't require all of that. And also make tap target the default targeting system, unless you're gonna buff people for using action combat. Yeah, it was the same for me, Mythos. I was playing, I think when I was like, I think like 11 or 12. And I was dog shit. I would get farmed out. Yeah, and to be clear, when I talk about like builds and meta mentality, a lot of meta slaves get really angry at me. Oh, well, you're just trying to make other players dumb. It's like, to be clear, you're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would shit on a player like you. Because you playing the meta is not good enough for a player like me. Because I can just counter whatever the meta is. Now I'll give you a great example, and I've done this 3 different occasions. Which is whenever I come back and play Guild Wars 2 sparingly, because I love the combat, but I just don't think it's that sustainable as a PvP game. And it obviously wasn't, it failed. But anyway, I come back and I play my classic Condition Mancer spec. This spec shits on the majority of players on ladder. Why? Is it because I'm just so good? Not really. Wanna know why? Because the majority of meta specs are not condition specs. And the majority of meta specs don't plan for condition specs. Because guess what? Guild Wars has always been about countering. Do you see why meta as a concept in PvP, even in Guild Wars, is so fucking funny? The game's always been about countering. So saying that a build is it's like, okay. It's like playing League of Legends. Oh my god, I'm playing Singed and somebody picked Teemo. This isn't fair. He's a counter lane. He's gonna counter me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it goes with the territory. I don't think Firebrand was the start to the turtle meta. The turtle meta existed in the first expansion. The turtle meta always existed, and it's because of SPVP is designed in a dumb way, with a dumb game mode, and B, the game is designed where power is always the solution. So how do you counter power? Blocking it, and having so much toughness that the power doesn't do anything anymore. Now, guess what? For a while, people like me could counter the balance because I could beat the bunker people by using conditions. But then the bunker people figured out there's ways that you can actually beat conditions by taking a couple of abilities here and there. And next thing you know, you can't take a point. Yeah. And people wonder why does nobody want to watch this shit? Because Because it was boring. Yeah, one thing about ANET is unlike most developers, WoW developers included, like Blizzard, so on and so forth, they've always been working on other projects. The problem is the other projects have never really worked out. So this is the first time that we've actually heard a green light being about Guild Wars and a third Guild Wars. So this is about as positive of a confirmation as you can get, to be honest. All right, so I wanted to cover some more topics because you know I love talking shit sometimes. And there was one about the daily grind, which is what Justin Olivetti writes, a very old school journalist in the field. If you had a free week, would you rather travel or play MMOs? Now I'm gonna sound edgy as fuck on this, okay? I would take the vacation, because that meant if you're implying that I had the money to take a vacation, I would take the vacation. Why did players like me vacation in MMOs instead of actually going on vacations? Because I didn't have any money as a kid, right? So it's not an either or for most of us, like maybe privileged people it was, but for many of us it was like, well, this is my vacation. Playing with my homies in Azeroth, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think like, I don't really like the framing of this question necessarily, right? Because if somebody might choose, even if they had the money, to stay in, but if you didn't have the money and you did have the money, then suddenly would you choose to stay? You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like there's a little bit of like a class divide here. And on top of that, I'm somebody who always brings my laptop with me. So if I really wanted to game, I would game on my vacation. And I've always been told by people, how could you do such a thing? Because everybody falls asleep at fucking 12 a.m., right? What do you think I'm doing for the next 3 hours? I'm playing whatever MMO I'm playing. All right, so did you guys hear that there's some new MMO/virtual world news at the TGA that came out? For example, Crimson Desert, which seems to be kind of like a MMORPG/CoOPRG. We have Warframe 1999, which looks like a cooperative Warframe. Power World has the next expansion, Faybreak. Steel Hunters is a new game from the World of Tanks/Warships developers, Wargaming, set in a new IP. It actually seems to be kind of like a mech game.
2067.
Oh wait, here's the gameplay review.
Remember this day, Hunter. We were built for victory. We are humanity's last chance.
Attention. Starfall site identified. Rival factions inbound.
Prepare to deploy.
I don't like their dimensions that much. What the heck? They look like a Zoid. These look like Zoids. They're okay. I'm a big mecha, mobile suit fan, for those that don't know. Yeah, they kind of look like Zoids. You know what? I'm okay with that. The Zoid franchise isn't doing fuck all, so. I think Crimson Desert looks like a worse Dragon's Dogma Online. Because, sorry, I don't think Korea has anything to innovate on that, model. Maybe they could, but they have never shown anything.
Part of the plan.
Yeah, that Zoid with the gun on his back, I'd play that guy.
Isn't over.
He reminds me of a Liger. customization systems and shit.
You will face impossible odds.
What the fuck, a Centurion? They run a little friendly, look at that. Let's look at the replay there.
Impossible odds.
Like his momentum was like a human, which is very strange. Was something that weighted, even with gesticulating joints, you wouldn't like move like that. I know, I'm a nerd. Sorry.
You're an emblem of hope.
Well, so do Japanese developers, Coralon. That's kind of my point, is that both markets pretty much don't really copy off each other almost at all. The times that they have been massive failures for the markets. Like, remember, I covered Shin Megami Tensei Imagine, and while it's very loved by, like, you know, core fans, it was a failure. And that was Japan's attempt at being like a Korean MMO. So, like, there's a like, as much as like Westerners think it's just like, well, Japan could just make whatever MMO they want, and Korea can just make a MMORPG, and they could make Monster Hunter Wilds. Like, they don't understand that it's also cultural differences, right? Japan's largely a console market, right? First thing out of the way. And second, Korea's used to a very particular style of MMO, you know? There is a new multiplayer, there's like a cooperative multiplayer Elden Ring that might actually get me to play the game. I know people might be laughing at the idea of something like this, but it looks like it's working on casuals like me. Because I'm a casual Japanese, like, action game gamer, not gonna lie. The only one that I'm really looking forward to is Monster Hunter Wilds. I could play Dragon's Dogma 2, but I just haven't been, like, rushing to play it yet. I don't think that that's true. Rentastic. Maybe more players are on mobile, but China dwarfs Korea and Japan's market mobile-wise combined. Like, China's the #1 mobile market, not even remarkably close. And Korea likes mobile games because they can play old school MMOs on them, basically. Like, yeah, there's more like low slop, like Final Fantasy copycat, like, you know, Fire Emblem copycat, but largely it seems like Koreans enjoy playing classic MMOs on mobile devices. I think Japan, as far as I've heard and seen, their mobile market's pretty small. It's pretty small fish. And my guess is that as PlayStation grows with their mobile market, because for those that don't know, PlayStation came up with a mobile market a couple of years ago, but hasn't really done anything with it. Their goal, though, is to put classic games on the mobile devices. So if they can actually accomplish that, and even Nintendo could accomplish that, and put games on mobile devices, I think mobile devices would start blowing up. I don't know if they're interested in doing that. At least Nintendo is. But they're definitely growing as a mobile and PC market. Yeah, no, I think it... When I was doing my mobile research, guys, look, you can see the look on my face. Like, I was dumbfounded when I found out that the size of the mobile market for gamers in China is bigger than the mobile market, period, in the US. Like, there's more stats that I could drop like that. It's bigger than all of Asia. Like, China's just so massive as a mobile market. And that's why I recently talked about this on Twitter with one of those recent games that came out. Not Honkai Star Rail, not Genshin Impact, and not that other one. But it was like a newer one that came out where China's having this massive global success. And what I said in my video, or rather my tweet, was it's because the bar is so fucking low, because I'm just going to be honest and call them out on it. But, you know, Korea and Japan were pachinkoing and gachaing the shit out of their mobile games, and I think over-exploiting the industry. That's why mobile games and mobile markets in Korea are collapsing. When I say collapsing, it's a bit of an exaggeration. They've gone down, though, exponentially. I think the past year, or 2, they were more than like 60 to 70% of NCSoft's stake. Now they've dropped like half that. So I think that's over exploitation, an example of it. But I think that China was like, you know what? We could take that approach, but that's not going to necessarily be the best approach. What if we actually make a good game on mobile? And the ironic part is most of the games that made them success are Japanese games, like meaning that they made them Japanese style, not Chinese style. So I guess what I'm trying to say is China is just outdoing the other big players in the mobile market, and the West isn't even a player. Let's be honest. We're not even in the running, you know? Zenless Zone Zero. That was one of the other ones I was thinking about. Yeah, Black Wukong as well. Good point. That it seems like China's making a deliberate effort to make video games for global audiences. Yeah, and Fluffmaster, memes aside, I think it's because Korea for such a long time was just taking the same formulas and trying to reapply them for the same money-making solutions. And, you know, players finally have gotten wise to it. And we're kind of like, we don't want to play these shit mobile games anymore. And I think that, you know, Korea's gonna have to do a little bit of like changing. And what I'm saying is that they've already shrunk a lot of their like big games that are supposed to come out in terms of their scale, like ArcAge and so on and so forth. But I'm wondering, like, if they don't pivot off of this correctly, this might actually be the moment, if they don't get unseated, that their spot at the top gets severely threatened by smaller players. And when I say smaller, I mean in terms of not being massive, like Japan. Even recently, Thailand came out. I think, no, Taiwan. It's either Taiwan or Thailand came out with like some big mobile MMO. It's only playable in those market, like the C market. But do you see what I'm saying? I guess what I'm trying to say is like enough time and people are getting wise, the audience, they're not buying the slop anymore. And they're expecting more. And Korea has always come out with the big titles. The problem is that they haven't as much of late. And that's because they've been kind of shifting their newer games into kind of smaller, more MMORPG style, like Japanese games. I don't actually think that that's going to be a good thing. I know people are trying to be high about Crimson Desert, but what does it offer that Dragon's Dogma, Monster Hunter World, or Wilds, or Phantasy Star don't? I don't know. I couldn't tell you, personally. So I think Korea's going to have to make this like rediscovery. Like, do they want to still continue to be a massive market that makes massive games? Is their fad obsession with mobile games kind of like dried up and they're going to start making some bigger, more like PC-centric games again? Or are they going to lose some of their footing and maybe the West makes a comeback, maybe Japan unseats them crazily? That would be nuts. If Japan came out with another major, massive online game that was good, I'm just going to be honest, I think they might be the next like virtual world like place to be. You see what I'm saying? It would just take one. Like if Yoshi P came out with some like, you know, Asheron's Call level game, like Japan would rocket to the top. You know what, Mr. Mir? That's not a bad idea or a bad point. Because of the success of Marvel Rivals and Wukong, both Chinese games, maybe this will require and take the Korean developers to not just look at the Japanese market, but look at the Chinese market and be like, fuck, we're getting wrecked. Because they are. Like, in terms of making those kinds of games. I think that's an oversimplification, Rintastic. I mean, like, you have to recognize that one of the most innovative MMOs ever is still Arcage. And Arcage is Korean as you can get. It's made by, like, the de facto Korean developer guy. And he's the guy that's, by the way, working on the next Arcage game. The problem is that the next Arcage game has reportedly been shrunk so much in terms of, like, what it's supposed to be. I don't really know what Jake Song's, like, trying to go for. Yeah, it says that he stepped down as the CEO of XL Games to specifically focus on Arcage 2. And I was told multiple times that Arcage 2 God damn, that was a good one. The beat. You look like a roofer. I hope your knees are holding. I'm laughing like crazy because I used to work as an installer and a surveyor in construction. And then I worked as a PM guy for like many years. And so my knees aren't so great because largely more so American football. But like, yeah, like to be honest, kneeing in construction wasn't good on my knees. How the fuck did you know that? How did you even know that? That's so random. And I've done attic work before too, and roof work. So I wasn't a roofer. I was an installer for other kinds of safety products, but like fire stop stuff. But that was funny as fuck. And that's the thing about me is like, even when people are insulting me, even if he was like, if it's a good meme, I just can't help it, bro. I have to laugh at it. But can somebody correct me on this? But didn't they say that the Arcage 2 is gonna be abandoning all the stuff that like the game was basically known for? Anyway, that kind of like puts a wrench in what I'm saying. But the point that I'm making is that Jake Song is a Korean developer. He has created 3 of the most impactful MMOs and virtual worlds ever. Theoretically, indirectly caused 4. Jake Song was originally at NCSoft. Came up with this Nexon, what was it called? Nexus Among the Winds? Is it? No, it's Nexus the Kingdom of the Winds. But that's just funny that you noticed that, the beat, because people are constantly surprised that I worked construction. So I'm just like, how the fuck did you know that I worked construction, bro? I worked it for like 7 or 8 years too. But no, so Nexus, the Kingdom of the Winds. This is a game that I'm going to cover at some point. Don't worry. When I get another sponsor, I'll definitely cover it. This is arguably the first MMORPG. Now here's the problem. During the time, MUDs were a thing, multi-user dungeons, and graphical MUDs, graphical multi-user dungeons. At the time, in the US, Meridian 59 came out around the same time and was called a graphical MUD. It doesn't get retroactive credit a lot of the time for being the first MMORPG, despite it was. People give that credit to either Ultima, right? Because it came after. They give the credit to Ultima. They say Ultima was the first commercial MMO, which is kind of true. It was, right? Like Meridian 59 wasn't like commercial yet, right? Like it was kind of like a smaller fish. That being said, nobody, including almost all of the West, gives Korea credit for making the first MMO. And that's because, at the time, you might be wondering what distinguishes it. It's not graphics. MUDs had graphics already. It's the scale, guys. Look at how many players are already in this small screenshot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. This is like 30 players. This is more players than you can play with in like Guild Wars 1 zones. Like, like, isn't that funny as fuck to think about? This is more players than you see in like a Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis zone. I can walk into cities in Final Fantasy 14 and see less players than this. Right? Because this is scale. Scale of the world. It was supposed to seem big and feel big and massive. This is a 96, guys. And 96. This game was a 96. Okay? Guess who was a developer on this game? Any guesses? Jake Song. So Jake Song like works on this project. I don't understand how this shit works. Jake Song helps create Nexon and Nexus, the Kingdom of the Winds. And my other timeline nerds can back me up on this. Then he goes to NCSoft and creates Lineage. And then leaves Lineage, or leaves NCSoft after a while. And goes and creates ArcGage. Like, that guy doesn't get enough credit. As much talk as Richard Garriott gets for just helping come up with one virtual world that was based on his RPG series, to be fair, and helping coin a term, Jake Song created 3 of the greatest and most impactful. And the reason why I said 4 is because he helped create Nexon, which created MapleStory. So, MapleStory, Lineage, Nexus, the Kingdom of the Winds, ArcGage. The dude has pretty much the GOAT track record, right? Like only like Raph Koster can like compete with UO and Galaxies being on his track record, which is like pretty fucking insane. Those are 2 of the greatest Western RPGs and online RPGs, period. So yeah, like, this is me defending the Korean market, kind of long-winded way, but I'm just trying to say, like, don't just think that like Korean MMOs are all about the common slop and the microtransaction shit. They've come up with amazing innovation. The problem is that their innovation kind of peters out, and then other people come in and just start like commodifying the fuck out of it. And I think that that's readily accepted in their market more so than other markets. So people having a kind of like, I get it. But remember, Korea is like ahead of the US right now and the head of the West right now. So we can hate on them, but they're doing a lot more than we're doing. Well, so Korean grinding was the first. I agree, actually. So Coralon, I'm glad there's other people here in chat that are experienced Korean MMO players. But he's right that like these 2 things have merged together. And I think that that's part of why there's so much hate for it. That's a good point. Actually, you know what? That's a really good point, Coralon. Gamsamnida. Gamsamnida. There's my Korean for you. But the reason why that's a really good point is that I think because they've become merged together, people always see them as the same thing and then therefore always view them negatively. The truth is, though, in Korea, the early games were just very grindy. They weren't actually microtransactions filled, or microtransaction filled. I have an editorial about this that nobody really watched that talks about the inception of microtransactions. And guess who invented them? Nexon. You shouldn't be surprised. But it's a bit of a misconception. People think that Nexon just created this in a vacuum. No. Nexon just took whatever was already in Japan, gacha, and pachinko, and just adapted that into our microtransaction kind of format and how they made money. Now, this was originally tested with a dying game. This game was going to die. And they tested this out back in like, I think 2003 or 4. So this is before Nexon came to the West, which why the timeline matches up. After they figured this out, they realized they made way more money in this game's lifetime than they ever made. So they found out that they could just do this to all of their dying games. So that's the irony, is that microtransactions and this pay-to-win kind of concept was actually a way to keep dying games alive. Isn't that funny as fuck? It was actually altruistic in some ways. Literally, the guy that invented it wanted to keep Quiz alive, a dying game that he liked. The problem is, they created evil. No, I'm just kidding. No, but when they created that concept, they hit the fucking gold mine. They realized, damn, this is genius. We could do this to all of our games, not just the dying ones. And they created what we know. Now, the problem with that is that people then associate all the negativity on Korea. I think that that's actually like kind of racist and wrong. And I'll tell you why. At the very least, it's xenophobic. I'll tell you why. After Nexon erected an office in the West, which NCSoft also did, by the way, in about 2004, 2005, I think 2005, more like 2006, they started introducing a lot of these ideas. Now, here's the thing. The Western markets wholeheartedly accepted many of these ideas and didn't really defend any of these ideas. Now, you might be saying, well, then why do so many people talk about microtransactions and Korean microtransactions in a negative way? It's because at the time when NCSoft and Nexon were transitioning to the West, they were getting everybody used to these kinds of mechanics and concepts with the games that were being introduced for the first time to these markets. So meaning that for players playing these games for the first time, this is what they would experience as like, this is how the game is built, right? So this would create a negative effect. Many players would quit these games, calling them pay to win, overly grindy, which is the first kind of criticism people would have. And then they started marrying the two together. Now, what happened during this time is that Western developers also learned that shit works, right? And I think kind of covertly, under everyone's noses, basically came up with games that are even worsely monetized in many cases, and yet they don't get that much criticism. Like, for example, ESO is the fucking Thanos Infinity Gauntlet of monetization. It's pay to win in every definition of the word. You have to pay for content, you have to pay for expansions, you have to pay for resources, you have to pay for like story quests and storylines. You have to pay for upgrades. I can keep going. Loot boxes, premium time. The game has so much monetization in it. And yet here's the problem. The mindset's still stuck in 2005 and 2006 when the Koreans introduced it for the first time. So everyone's still blaming the Koreans for it. Do you see how fucking stupid it is? It's like, guys, the Western people like us, we've been running with it now for like 10 plus years, okay? It was brought to the West in like 2006 or 7, and it became propagated in 2011, 2012, and 13, even more. That's 10 years ago. Meaning that we can't blame Korea anymore. What the fuck? Like, and the good examples of this is that XO Games, talking about ArcAge, said that game made more money in the West than it did in the East. What does that mean? It means they found more whales in the West than they found in the East. So this concept of like only Korean players are whales, it's a fantasy world that people like to create because they like to like demonize another group of people. There's plenty of whales in the West, guys. Maybe. I'm not sure about the data on that, Rentastic, but maybe. Yeah, EA adapted the Korean style very well. Look at my team. And don't get me wrong, EA gets a lot of shit for that stuff, but I'm just saying, like, you kind of see what I'm saying. Like, the hate is not necessarily directed at them for propagating it more. The hate gets thrown at the creators for some reason. It's like the creators actually had a good reason to come up with this concept. It's just that many Western developers took, you know, Korean concepts and ran with them. The most famous example was Try on Worlds. Yeah, but Nexon didn't have offices, so I don't really think that that applies. For example, the game that had microtransactions didn't even exist in the West. So, for example, when Nexon first brought their US studio, they immediately came after, I think, with MapleStory 2. But let me double check. Okay, so after Wizard does MapleStory in Korea in 2003, it gets adapted to a bunch of other regions. So after that point, that's probably, I would say, like from 2003 on, that's probably when everyone starts to know about Nexon. Because as much as Nexus, the Kingdom of the Winds, is a pioneer, nobody knows that. and cares, sadly, about pioneers that much. Which is sad, but true. But I didn't know Nexon made Dungeon Fighter. What the fuck? What the fuck? Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know that. I love that there's so much in this fucking industry I'm still learning all the damn time. So for people that don't know, DFO, Dungeon Fighter Online, is one of the most successful games of all time. One of the most popular games of all time, and nobody even knows what the fuck the game is because it was popular in China. And China's market's so big that it could get by off of not really being popular elsewhere. Well, Nexon created that game too. Okay, so Nexon goes public in 2011, but why is it not mentioning their US office? It probably didn't do very well, so they don't want to talk about it. I'm looking for it right now. Let's see. So 2006, yeah. So pretty much right around the time I said. Like, Nexon came in 2006, and I think NCSoft came in 2005. But let me double check. NCSoft US office. It's 2004. Wait. Yeah. No, actually. Oh, this makes more sense because Richard Garriott is the one who secured many of the Asian titles to come to the West. So NCSoft was before Nexon's company, which is why NCSoft was already in the US market, and yet people didn't feel like it widely changed things in terms of monetization yet. That's because NCSoft didn't. It was already in the market for like 4 or 5 years before that and had like 3 or 4 games come out that weren't necessarily known as being overly pay to win. So really, like, Nexon does get a lot of the credit of being the one to propagate things. But obviously after they did, NCSoft copied all of the same ideas, and all the other developers copied the same ideas too. So, makes sense. I saw that, by the way, Dioth, which I thought was really fucking random. That they sold the rights to some other company. Yeah, which is so strange. But yeah, anyway. So let me make sure to make that point distinction. NCSoft was already in the US for a number of years at that point, but they weren't known for ever being like the gotcha, pay to win, microtransaction people. They just had grindy games. That was kind of what they were known for, so. But yeah, long story short, you can't blame Korea 20 years later. You know what I'm saying? Like, when the Western developers have already been doing it for at least 15 years. So is actually so is fuck the first FPS, the first MMO FPS, Neocron. Neocron and one of the other like games like Neocron is actually still going as well. Isn't that crazy? Like, these games never get talk, Nexus, Neocron, but they're actually like two of the oldest running games still. Like, they're still running. You can still go play them, which is pretty fucking crazy to think about. I mentioned it before, Dioth, but the reason that I never got into Nexus before is because A, the timing of it, and B, by 2001, I was already playing Dark Eden, which started to come to Europe and the West. And I was playing it on online Korean and Japanese servers first, and then they came out with an international version in like 2002 or 3. So yeah, I was really plugged into Dark Eden, and Dark Eden came out in Korea, I think in '99. So it's essentially kind of like a Lineage, like Diablo copycat, but it came before Lineage, so it's a lot more like Diablo. Yeah, Mr. Mir, NCSoft told their investors, and it got confirmed. So I don't know if honestly, Life of the Game as a series, I'll say before I leave, I've always kind of like wanted to design it more for games that took big hits then came back, not games that are still necessarily alive. And although that, you know, pisses some people off because they always say, but that's not a literally dead game. Dead has many, many different meanings that are already explained in the series in the description, but I didn't even know Nexus was even still alive. Well, I remember that it was alive, sorry, but I remember that it was alive, you know what I'm saying? And so I don't think most people even know about it. So if I cover that in Death of a Game, to most people that is a death of a game. Whereas like something that made a comeback to me is like Rainbow Six or No Man's Sky, which I should do those, honestly. I don't have an excuse anymore. Well, that's the thing, is Western developers have been catching shit for a little bit of time, but they've just doubled down, basically. Especially because Westerners have realized that a large reason that Korean fans even had this and supported these concepts in the first place was because it keeps the games alive. For example, Star Trek Online, for example, SWTOR. These are two games where people basically take the shitty monetization because they just don't want the games to die. So yeah, we're part of the problem, and we're still part of the problem. And the fact that people eat up that slop and then defend it is part of the problem too. But anyway, I'm actually gonna head out, guys. It was nice talking to everybody. Today's supposed to be my editing day, and I went a little bit longer than I intended, but it was nice chatting with everyone. Have a good rest of your weekend, and peace.